who is the Democratic candidate for Attorney General, and also Alicia Kennedy, who is the candidate for Lieutenant Governor. And Rich will be talking about restoring integrity and accountability in the Attorney General's office. And Alicia Kennedy will be talking about using your personal influence for getting out the vote. And then on Tuesday, November 10th, we will host Charles Jaco, who is an award-winning journalist and author, as you know. And we don't yet know the subject or of his program, the title of his program. That will depend on what happens on November 3rd and the week after, but I'm sure he will have a lot to offer to us either way. And then I just want to tell you, we are also hosting a sign distribution, a candidate sign distribution for Biden-Harris signs, Nicole Galloway, Jill Shoup, and No on 3 signs. All of those will be available this Saturday from noon till 2 p.m. at Caldy's Coffee in the Valley. And that's at 17211 Chesterfield Airport Road. And it's right next to the On the Run station and across from Red Lobster. And if you can't get there during that time and you would like a vote, you may also contact our Chesterfield Township Committee woman, Kathy Paulsmeyer, and at her email, which is cpauls, that's PAULSMEYER @gmail. And then lastly, if you are not yet a member of Chesterfield Township Dems, and we have so many interesting things going on and so many interesting people. I've made some of my best friends through Chesterfield Township Dems. And we'd encourage you to join by going to our website, which is chesterfielddemocrats.org. And there's a membership tab. Or you can join our Facebook page, which is Chesterfield Township Democrats. Thank you so much. And I'll turn it back over to Mike. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Kathy. Just to supplement something she said, I voted yesterday, or Monday, sorry, and I actually went up to the Bureau of Elections. By the time I parked my car, walked through the parking lot, cleared security, turned in my absentee ballot, I would have to go get it notarized. And I said, well, by the time I go get it notarized, I might as well just go up there and vote. So I turned in my absentee ballot, got a new ballot, voted, and was back in my car. And over lunch hour, it only took about 20 to 25 minutes. Very well organized. And as Kathy said, they did have separate lines set up. So if you want to bring your completed ballots up there, they'll check it in right there. It was a very fast and efficient process. And so if you're thinking about doing it, I can at least give you an actual experience, what my experience was going up there and voting. So I know you're anxious to hear tonight's speaker. Gloria Bilczek is from St. Louis, and she has written a book about elections. She calls herself an election junkie. I know she'll do a better job of explaining her passion and experiences, so I'm just going to turn it over to her. She would like to keep this informal. So as you ask questions, please use the Q&A box. I will ask them of her as they come in, and we'll try and keep this conversational and informal as much as we can in this non-personal technology forum here tonight. So, Gloria.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you for inviting me. I'm delighted to be here. I've been doing a number of these book chats, and I'm enjoying them very much, more for what I learned from the people I'm talking to than from what I can teach. I can't teach anything. You guys know a lot. So it's really a pleasure to be with this highly engaged, politically active group of people, because I know you're very knowledgeable. I was just listening to Kathy talking about all the permutations of voting this November, and I know you're all very highly informed. So I'm not going to try to teach you the basic stuff. I know you know all the basic stuff. What I would like to do is share with you the book that I wrote, which was just published in June. It's called Election Insiders. You can see it in you can see it there behind me, Election Insiders, behind the scenes with the people who make your vote count. I should warn you from the get-go that I am not an expert, but I call myself an observer with opinions, and I have a lot of opinions. So what I'm going to do to kick things off here, I'm just going to give you a quick outline of how I plan to approach this. I'm going to tell you a few stories. I'm going to tell you why I wrote the book. I'm going to tell you how I wrote the book, share a few tidbits of what I learned in researching this book, maybe share some of the big takeaways that I came away with after writing the book. But then I would really very much like to talk with you and hear your questions. If you've read the book, your comments, any observations you have, so that we can interact and I can learn from you as well. So let me start by who I am, Gloria Bilchik. I've lived in St. Louis for, I don't know, since 1964, grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, and I have been a freelance writer for the last, I don't know, 40 years, but an election junkie. I mean, I've been a lot of different things around the edges of elections. And, you know, I've worked in campaigns. I was a volunteer coordinator on the Obama campaign in 2008. I was the West County coordinator for volunteers, which was a huge, fun experience, a peak life experience for me. Met a lot of people that way, saw a lot of how campaigns work. And I've also done a lot of fringy election jobs. You know, I've stood out and handed out literature at polling places, which I'm sure almost everybody in this crowd has done. I have canvassed, I've knocked on doors, I've done lit drops. Back in the day, I stuffed envelopes, dialed for dollars, did all the basic things. And just along the way, I just got more and more sucked into the whole world of elections. And that is where I was coming from. So it took me 70 years to come up with a really good idea for a book, but here it is. So Election Insiders, the reason I wrote it, obviously I'm an election junkie. I'm a freelance writer, journalist. I've written about a lot of stuff, and I'm just curious about a lot of stuff. And what I learned as a freelance writer over many years was you can call anybody up about anything. And you know, if you're a reporter, you can just call people up and ask them stuff. And that is just such a freeing kind of stance to have in your life. So I've done that a lot. I've called a lot of people up and asked them a lot of questions. And the genesis of this book really came from a few years ago. I went on a tour of St. Louis County Board of Elections backstage. And I was with a bunch of high school students, and they took us into places I didn't know existed. We saw people verifying signatures on petitions, and we saw people processing voter registration cards. And we saw the tabulation room where they count the ballots. I saw the warehouse where the equipment was stored, and I thought, wow, this is something that voters do not see. We do not know that this exists. Most voters, maybe not you guys, because you're much more active and engaged, but most voters do not think about voting very much, about the process behind your ballot. In fact, a few years ago, a politician, I think it was Sam Page, was giving a presentation, and he said the definition of election junkie is someone who thinks about voting more than 10 minutes before they walk into the polling place. So I found that very interesting. So I started thinking about it. What do we not know about how voting works? You know, we think a lot about, we think on a different level. We think about campaigns a lot. How do we raise the money? How do we reach the voters? What are the polls? How do the polls work? That's one level. We think about policy, you know, and voting policy and what are the rules for voting in various states and who's getting cheated out of their vote and, you know, voting rights and things like that. But the third level that we don't think about that much is how the work is actually done behind the scenes. What goes on backstage? And, you know, and it's very interesting. When I started this research, I asked election administrators, what do you wish voters knew that they don't already know? And there was this outpouring of stuff. But the main thing was, their main thing that they said was, people think that we only work one day every 4 years. And, we want people to know what we do the other 364 days per year. And I thought that was a great opening for my book. And after the tour, I said to Eric Fay, who was the Democratic director of elections in St. Louis County, I said, I think I could write a book about what you guys do. And he sort of laughed. He said, you actually think this is interesting? I mean, this is just work. We just do this stuff. And I said, yeah, I think it's interesting and I want to know more about it. So that is where I started. And I started by presenting my idea to Eric Fay and Rick Stream, who was the Republican co-director. And I was going to focus my energy on St. Louis County. And that's where I did my hands-on research. And they loved the idea, but they actually did not think I'd actually write the book. They all thought, yeah, little old lady, she'll come in for a few things, she'll be gone. That's how it went. So I talked to them, and then they said, well, you need to talk to the board of directors, because there is an overarching board of commissioners, which consists of 2 Republicans and 2 Democrats, and they are the policy setters to whom the administration reports. So I went to they said, come to the Board of Elections meeting on Tuesday at 2:00 and present your proposal. So I had this whole proposal about what I was going to do. And there's the public portion of the meeting, which I'm sure some of you have spoken at over the years. And they said, okay, what is it you want to talk to us about? And I said, well, I'd like to write a book about what goes on behind the scenes here. And I said, here was my fatal mistake. I said, I'd like to be a fly on the wall at election headquarters. And there was this what? And the chairman of the board said, what do you mean by fly on the wall? And I knew I was in deep trouble. So I said, well, I just want to see, I want to meet the people. I want to meet the people who do the work here. I want to see what they do and how they do it and why they do it and why they stick around and what are the challenges that they have to overcome and what are the crazy things that happen. And the answer was, well, we'll think about it. And then I heard nothing for weeks. And then Eric Fay called me and said, I don't think this is going to happen. They don't like this fly on the wall thing, which obviously I had oversold it and blew it. And he said, I just don't think it's going to happen. And something clicked in my head and I said, I'm too old to give up on these things. And I thought, I'm not going to give up. So I said, let me rejigger my proposal. And I rejiggered it and said, I'll talk to whoever you want me to talk to. You can set up the interviews for me. You can have a minder with me. I won't just wander around. It'll all be set by appointments. And they warmed up a little bit. And then what happened was I just started showing up. I started showing up to the board meetings. And then I talked to Eric and Rick and interviewed them and then did a few more things. And as time went on, the doors opened and pretty soon I was in. So that is, and as I started, I thought this book was going to be about, obviously about the people, and it is about the people who do the work. And we'll talk about that a little bit. But in terms of issues, in 2019, the big issue for all the election jurisdictions around the country was new voting equipment. St. Louis County had 15-year-old electronic touchscreen machines that were malfunctioning and not able to be fixed anymore. And everybody was buying, there was a buying spree for equipment. And I thought that's going to be what this story is about. But of course, as things evolved, guess what? The pandemic came in and security became an issue and integrity became an issue and safety became an issue. So the story evolved. So those of you who have already written a book, and there's probably somebody out there who has, that you start somewhere and you sometimes end up someplace else. And that's sort of what happened for me. So that is sort of why I wrote the book. I was looking at St. Louis County, honestly, not because I had done a lot of research about all kinds of other jurisdictions, but obviously it was convenient. I live here, I vote here. It's 15 minutes from my house. Eric Fay and Rick Stream are very open to the idea. So I said, okay, I try it. I want to say from the beginning, though, that although it reads to some people like a hyper local story, that this is just about St. Louis County, it really turns out that St. Louis County is a microcosm of election administration all over the country. It happens to be one of the larger jurisdictions because we have about ranging between 735 and 750,000 registered voters. And that's among, in rankings, that's among the top 25 or 30 in size around the country. So everything that happens in St. Louis County may not happen exactly the same way as it happens in Harris County, Texas, but the issues are the same. There are universal issues that every election administrator is facing and challenges. And so what I hope is that people can read this book and extrapolate from that and see what really happens in lots of places using St. Louis County as an example. And I must say that one of the conclusions that I came to is that St. Louis County is a pretty darn good example of administration. They are known in many circles as forward thinking and, honest and pretty well managed. So that made it better for me because I was not out to write an expose. I just walked in the door and thought, I don't know what I'm going to find, but I'm going to report what I found. And that's what you find in the book. Now let me just go on to how I did this. It was very much of an experiential project. This is not an academic book. I don't have a lot of statistics. I don't have any study. I didn't do a study. It's not scientific. It's not academic. It's very journalistic. And I hope it reads that way. But in trying to find out who does the work, who does this stuff, how does the ballot get to you, who sets up the equipment, that's what I was looking for. And I want to know who the people were. So there's sort of three phases to how I did this. I interviewed up and down the line. I interviewed from the chairman of the Board of Commissioners to everybody in between, people who were part-timers, people who were full-timers, the warehouse guys, the people who draw the maps, the people who verify the signatures. I interviewed all those people up and down the line. I asked them, what they do, why they do it, why they stay, those kinds of things. And of course, I observed them at their work. The second facet of this was my own experiential things. I observed other people working, but I also went to all the training sessions for poll workers and for supervisors. As they were buying equipment and searching for new equipment last year, I went to all the demonstrations by all the companies that were bidding on bringing in new equipment to St. Louis County. They all had demonstrations. Maybe some of you saw them on Facebook. They ran them live. And then the third aspect of this, all of these are happening at the same time, of course, over a period of about 18 months. And the third aspect of the research was Election Day Live, which is my sort of final chapter in the book. And I observed several elections, but the main one that I sat in on was March of this year, the presidential preference primary. And I showed up at headquarters at a little before 5 a.m. and I stayed till the last dog died, meaning the last ballot was counted at about 10 o'clock at night. And my last chapter chronicles what I saw that day, which was to me very fascinating. And it was like the culminating part of all of the other things. You just saw all the moving parts coming together and sometimes falling apart on election day. So that's the why and the how. A couple of stories that I came across in my research, stories from other jurisdictions that just are emblematic of the kinds of challenges that election administrators face all over the country and all over the world. For example, for those of you who have not read the book, for those of you who read the book, you already know all this, but for those of you who had not, this might be new information. In the 2019 election in India, where there were 900 million voters, they had to set up 1 million voting booths, voting stations, some of which they had to set up, if you've been to India, which I have not, but it's pretty sprawling and has lots of different terrain. And some of the voting stations had to be set up could only be accessed by riding an elephant or bringing it in on a helicopter or taking a boat across, a lagoon. And that was quite an endeavor. Similarly, in Indonesia, they had a very big election in 2019. And unfortunately, after election day, I'm sorry, I'm not laughing. After election day, 270 poll workers died. And they died because of the occupational hazard of counting ballots by hand in high heat and humidity. And 270 people died of heat exhaustion counting ballots. Closer to home in 2018 in Arizona, poll workers, and some of you who are poll workers may relate to this, poll workers showed up to their assigned polling place and they found that the place had been padlocked and foreclosed upon by the bank the night before the election. And inside was all the equipment, all the voting equipment, all the ballots, everything was inside and they couldn't get in. So the county clerk who ran the election had to set up, she had to get new equipment, new ballots, new everything, and set up a polling place in the parking lot. Even closer to home, in 2018, we had the PGA National Golf Tournament here in St. Louis. Some of you may have attended that. And it coincided with the week of the August primary election in Missouri. And the election board found out about this, 6 to 8 weeks ahead of time. And they realized that the PGA had bought up all the parking spaces in a big radius around the location of the golf tournament. So that basically knocked out about 6 polling places. So they had to scramble and find new polling places. So they said, okay, we'll go to the churches, Well, funny story, the PGA had also bought up all the parking lots of all the churches in that radius. So it was quite a scramble. They had to find 6 new polling places. That's another challenge. And then here's a challenge. This is the last one. This took place just this year in New Hampshire. And if you've ever been a poll worker, you faced some crazy situations, I'm sure. And in New Hampshire this year, as you know, if you've been a poll worker, voters are not allowed to show up wearing campaign hats or paraphernalia or buttons or t-shirts or anything like that. And it's something you have to deal with as a poll worker. Well, in New Hampshire, a voter came in and she was wearing a t-shirt emblazoned with her candidate's name. And the poll worker said, I'm sorry, ma'am, can't come in here with that shirt on. And normally what people do is they go out to the car and they put on a sweater or sweatshirt, or they go in the bathroom and they turn it inside out, which is considered acceptable. She said, oh, really? So she took off her t-shirt under which she was wearing nothing and she voted naked. So those are some of the crazy things that happen. I feel like I've talked a lot here. I can share more things as we talk. If there's anybody out there who would like to make an observation about the book or a comment about the book or a question about voting, I'll do my best. So fire away. Is there anything up there, Mike?
Okay. Well, we are going to try something here. On the Q&A function, there's something called the raised hand. If you can still send in questions using the question and answer function, but I have a trial here. Paul would like to ask a question, so we're going to try this and see how this works tonight. So
Okay,
hopefully Paul can now ask his question.
fire away.
Okay, Gloria, first of all, can you hear me okay, since this is a test?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I share your respect for the voting people here in St. Louis County. I've been here for 40 years now, and I have great respect for the management of the election office, election facilities, and the personnel in them. So I'm glad you recognize that. My question is, what is your opinion of right now with the way things are, how we should vote with the threat of COVID? Many of us don't feel that going into a polling booth is very safe. We don't know what the lines are going to be like, whether people will wear masks, what the social distancing might be. At the same time, there are a lot of questions about voting absentee versus mail-in voting. Can we take them to a voting place? I know we can take them to our polling place, but can we take them to the election authority? Can we take a mail-in ballot to the election authority? So I guess to get to my question, with all the confusion and what's going on, in your opinion, how should we vote? What's the best way in St. Louis County for this election coming up now for us to vote?
Okay, big question. I mean, my experience with St. Louis County, and I continue, since the book was published, I have continued to stay in touch with everybody in St. Louis County, and I'm trying to keep up with all the changes here and elsewhere, and it's mind-boggling how fast things are changing with regard to voting. My sense of St. Louis County is you have a lot of options for voting, as you've outlined, and my sense is that all of them are solid. Okay, I can give you a few examples. I mean, personally, I feel that the hype over the post office is overhyped. I think a paranoia has been created at the top to discourage us from using mail-in voting, and I don't think that the post office is as bad as they're trying to make it seem. Pardon me? Were you saying something? Okay. In St. Louis County, the mail goes through the St. Anne post office. And I was at the St. Louis County Board of Elections on Friday, and I actually met with the mailroom supervisor. His name is Derek. And he said that they have an excellent relationship with the St. Anne post office. And the post office does treat absentee ballots as first-class mail, even though it says business reply on it. That is a postal regulation. And I can tell you that having talked to them on Friday, they had already the ballots went out on Tuesday. The first wave went out on Tuesday. People received them on Wednesday. They started receiving absentee ballots through the mail on Thursday. That's how fast people are voting. And by Friday afternoon, when I was there, they had already received 1,200 ballots. I mean, that's small compared to the universe of ballots, but they're starting to come in, and it looked pretty efficient to me. In terms of voting absentee, I think it's fine. I don't think there's a problem. Your question about the mail-in ballots have to be mailed in. That's why they call them mail-in. Don't ask me why the legislature decided to add this mail-in thing. It's just totally confused everybody. But it's legit. It's just that the mail-in ballots must be mailed in and have to be notarized. There's no way around notarization. So I mean, I can't really tell you which way to vote. You have to vote in the way that's the most comfortable for you. As for voting in person, I continue, as I said, to connect with the Board of Elections office. And I continue to go to their board meetings and listen in on their Zoom board meetings, that is. And there has been a lot of attention paid to COVID. In fact, one of the things that just happened was that St. Louis County alone bought 500,000 pens so that everybody who votes in person will get their own personal pen. So you won't be reusing anybody else's pen, and they will not have to be sanitizing the pens after everybody uses them. And in fact, it's even better than that, because these 500,000 pens that they bought are the kind that's, one side is the pen and one side is the stylus. So when you sign in, if you vote in person, you can sign in on the poll pad with the stylus, and you won't have to touch the stylus. Also, in terms of safety and security, St. Louis County has a mandatory mask requirement. So everybody is required to wear a mask in the polling place. And as a matter of fact, they have hired 200 people to be security monitors or health monitors standing outside of the polling places in November to remind everybody that they need to wear a mask. And if they're not wearing a mask, they can hand it to them. So there's a lot of that. And there's, they do have social distancing requirements. All of the poll workers will be wearing PPE at some level. They all wear gloves. They all wear masks. I'm not sure if they might be wearing shields. I don't remember if that was the case. So there's all of that going on. And they will be social distancing in the lines, which will make the lines feel longer. But I think all of those things are in play. Does that help answer your question?
Yes, it does. The only thing that's unclear to me that you might clarify, since you have a relationship with the election authority, I know we're all concerned that we fill out the ballot correctly.
Yes.
If we mail it in, whether it be a mail-in or an absentee ballot, and we mail it in and it's not properly filled out,
Yes.
what are the consequences?
Oh, that's a great question. I'm glad you brought that up. So in August, they had an avalanche of absentee ballots, and an avalanche that they had never had before. And there were lots of ballots that were not properly filled out because so many people were voting absentee for the first time in their lives that there was lots of material involved in the absentee ballot that was instructional, but it overwhelming, and the back of the ballot was really completely confusing to a lot of people. So lots of ballots came in that were not valid, the ballot envelope. So because they noticed this happening, they started segregating out those envelopes. And there was maybe some of the people on this webinar did this, but the League of Women Voters and the election protection organizations sent in volunteers, and I did this job myself. And we went in and they gave us these incomplete ballots, and we called everybody that we could get a hold of, and we'd say, we got your ballot, but you didn't sign it. So here's how you can fix that. And they had a whole process for how you could fix it. So that was very helpful. The good news, if any of you voted absentee in August, the good news is that very confusing ballot, which you need to sign on the back, that ballot envelope has been redesigned. And because so many people complained, and one particular election protection organization said, why don't you do it this way? And they gave them sort of a mock-up of a redesign. And in fact, they have done that. And so the new absentee ballot envelope that you would receive is infinitely more clear. And I'm sure there will be infinitely fewer mistakes. But the ones that come in with mistakes that can be reached, they will reach out to you if you made a mistake.
That's reassuring. Thank you, Gloria. I'm looking forward to reading your book.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Paul. I'm going to, Al, you've raised your hand with a question. You want to ask your question now, please?
There.
Al
Are you
Gerber. I know Al Gerber.
Hi, Gloria. It's great to see you.
I know Al from working on campaigns.
That's true. We've worked together. On a couple minutes, I came in a couple minutes late, so I didn't hear you say where we go to buy the book.
Amazon, Barnes and Noble, it's all online.
Oh, it's one of those. Okay, good enough.
Yeah, I mean, there's a paperback and there's a Kindle,
Okay,
but you can buy it, all the online places.
okay, great. Well, you can't sign a Kindle one, so okay. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else?
I've got another raised hand here. Trish, are you there? Would you like to ask your question?
I would, thank you. Hi, Gloria. This is Trish Gunby. I'm state rep in the 99th.
I know who you are. I know who you are.
Oh, exciting, thank you.
A friend of mine worked with you on your campaign.
Oh, well, it's funny you mentioned that, because actually my comment has something to do about that. I want to echo what you said about those of us who are probably on this virtual meeting and know much more about the voting process and all of that than a lot of folks out there. I'm running for re-election. I went through the district 7 times in my special election. There were only 2 signs that people could pick. And I just found out some polling data that 25 to 30% of people in my district still don't know who I am.
Interesting.
And so what I want people to hear from that is we tend to get so insulated in our own worlds, and we know all the work we're doing, but we keep engaging many of the same people. And the way you reach those that aren't as engaged is, it's incumbent upon the candidate or whatever the ballot issue is. You just have to keep getting out there, meeting people, promoting yourself any way you can. And it's obviously challenging during these times, but I just want people to understand that, all these things that are coming up on our ballot, Amendment 3, a lot of stuff out there that some things feel like slam dunks. That's not the case, because a lot of people will not know what any of this is until they walk in and go to fill out their ballot on election day.
Which slows down the voting process,
Exactly. And
yeah.
I hit a bunch of, I'm door knocking, and I'm hitting doors now. People are like, I already mailed my ballot. And so, you just try to stay ahead of it. But I just want to echo what you said and make folks realize that there are a lot of people out there who don't know candidates, don't know issues, and it takes money and time and on the ground work to continue, advancing whatever you believe is important to you, whether it's a candidate or an issue. So I just wanted to say that. But thank you for your book. It's on my reading list on
Okay.
November 4th.
Well, I mean, it's interesting because there's the parallel between what a candidate has to do in the background that people don't really know about, and what the election boards have to do in the background that people don't really know about. So, there are parallels there for sure.
Well, and I reached out, I actually did a mailer with the absentee ballot application in an envelope to many constituents in my district. And they received that, because when I spoke with Eric Fay after the primary, I said, if you had to tell folks one thing out of all of this, what would you recommend? And he said, vote absentee.
Okay.
That was his recommendation.
Well, I mean, yes, he can recommend everything he wants, but I have to tell you, there is just a slight bit of self-interest in that. because normally, okay, on a normal election day, according to Eric, 90% of the vote comes in at the polling places and 10% comes in absentee. This year, they are expecting, well, even in August, they had about 30% that came in absentee, which is, that's a gigantic increase.
Right.
And he would be very happy if 50% of the vote came in on absentee, because that would relieve a lot of pressure on election day, which is also going to be very, very big. So there's just that little bit of self-interest.
Right. And he did admit to that, in the sense that he said at that time, we don't know what's going to happen with the virus. We don't know, our average poll worker is 74 years old.
Right.
Trying to find folks to sub for them, changing polling locations. I mean, there are so many moving parts. That was, a big part of it. But yeah, I get where you're coming from. So
Okay.
thank you. Thank you for shedding a light on what's behind the curtain, the
Thank
wizard.
you. Thank you for saying that.
All right. Thank you, Trish. Hopefully I'm going to pronounce this name correctly. Smadar, are you there? Hopefully I
Yes.
got your name close
Yes,
there.
I am, and it is Smadar, but that's okay.
Thank you.
Thank you for taking my question. We have mailed our absentee ballots last week, and I wanted to know how long it will take for the tracker to show that they have been delivered to the election authorities.
Okay, well, I actually don't know the answer to that question. I mean, they are processing them as fast as they can. It's how long does it take, how long does it take to get to the post office, and how long does it take the post office to, it goes downtown. Everything goes downtown. So then how long does it take for the post office to sort it out and get it out to St. Anne? And then how long does it take St. Anne to get it to the election board. And then how long does it take the election board to process them? Because every absentee ballot that comes in, the first thing they do is they stamp it that it was received. Okay, so that's number one. Then they have the bins, and then they have to look them all over. And so, they're putting them in the database. So I don't know. I mean, it's not instantaneous.
Okay,
But
very much.
But I just want to say that this is only the third time, I think, that they're using this ballot tracking software. And the first time they did it, it didn't work very well. So the second time they did it was in August, and it worked way better. So I'm expecting even more improvement this time around.
Okay, thank you. With that, just a point of clarification for me, because you're talking about them checking these ballots as they're being received.
Yes.
But when do they actually start tallying so that they have numbers to report on election night?
They don't tally them till election day. They
But
are
they
not
will.
allowed, they are not allowed to open them until 5 days before the election, which is Thursday. So they will have gone through all the envelopes. They will have checked the envelopes to see if they've been properly filled out. They will try to notify the people if they weren't. And then they will, they'll be ready to be opened. Then you start opening them on the 5 days before. They have a slicer machine that slices them open. And then they have a job classification called ballot opener. This is one of the jobs I had no idea existed until I started doing this work. And I thought, what the heck is a ballot opener? Well, there's a mechanical ballot opener, which is, it looks like a meat slicer from a deli, and it just slices off the end of the ballot so that you can pull the ballot out. Then all those sliced open ballots go to the ballot opener people. Now that is, I can talk about that for a second. Like everything else in St. Louis County and in most jurisdictions right across the country, everything you do requires a Democrat and a Republican to initial it, to look at it, to approve it. As Eric Fay has said, you need two people to open a ballot, a Democrat and Republican. You need a Democrat and Republican to walk into the tabulation room. You need a Democrat and a Republican to okay a voter registration card. Okay. The only thing you can do in St. Louis County without a Democrat and Republican is go to the bathroom. So the ballot openers they are also a balanced political balance. So they sit at a table and they are socially distanced at this table. There's a Republican and a Democrat, and they take the sliced open ballot and they check it in. They have a list of who sent in their ballots, and they make sure that the list of who sent in their ballots and the ballots that they have tallies together. And they make sure that all the markings are correct again. And then they only then can, and they save all the envelopes, and then they take the ballot out. And at that point, they have to deal with the actual physical ballot. They are not counting it. They have no ability to count. But a lot of the ballots that come in with, people send notes. They send Post-it notes. Some of them have coffee stains on them. Some of them are torn. Some of them are crumpled. There's all kinds of things. They have to take those ballots and prepare them for the scanner. That is basically their job. And so they're flattening them out, or they're taping them back together. And so that's what ballot openers do. And they get them ready to be scanned, but they cannot be scanned until election day. And interestingly, you may already know this, but I'm just going to mention it. On election night, if you are an election junkie and you're following the returns as they come into St. Louis County, as they're reported, usually there is a report very soon after 7 o'clock. Usually by 7:30, there's a report. And that report is the absentee ballots, because they are tallied first, because they're ready. So that's my spiel on absentee ballots and ballot opening. Does that help you with your question?
Yes, and that's good to know. We won't be one of those states that, doesn't open them till the polls close, and there won't be a long delay coming out of Missouri. We will be right there up front with all
Correct.
those results.
Correct. Yeah, as you correctly note, there are a bunch of states, Michigan most notoriously, cannot touch the ballots until the polls close. They can't touch the absentee ballots until the polls close. That is just insane. Insane. And I know that Eric and Rick have every year, they go to the legislature and they say, can we please get more days for processing absentee ballots? 5 days isn't enough. You know, I have some statistics here. Let's see. They are expecting, let's see, they sent out already, they've sent out 100,000 absentee ballots. That is just huge. And there will be more. And they, you know, they expect a lot, most of those to come back. So they're sort of running 2 elections. They're sort of running the in-person election and they're running the absentee election. So it's quite a difficult operation. Okay, next
I've
question.
got some questions that have come in on the Q&A function, so I'm going to read these here.
Okay.
How do the polling staff deal with situations of voter intimidation?
Well, I don't think they've had a lot of that. I didn't hear, I mean, when I asked about the challenges, I didn't hear much about voter intimidation. You mean people trying to prevent people from voting?
Or getting to change votes or anything that prevents somebody from the free will of selecting their candidate?
I honestly, I'm not an expert on that. I haven't heard much about that. I think that's a fear. Okay, you know, there is a rule, if you've ever worked at a poll, there's a rule that you can't be within 25 feet of the entrance to the polling place. So, you know, I'm sure Trish Gunby knows all about that. Because someone, you know, some people do complain. They say the electioneering is happening too close to the door, and some poll worker has to go out and say, you're too close. And as a matter of fact, the packet that poll workers have with them on election day when they set up the polls includes a ruler and a piece of chalk. So in case they have to mark it out on the parking lot that this is the 25-foot line.
Okay,
Does that help with the question?
it does.
That's all I know.
believe.
Okay,
It wasn't mine, so I'm interpreting what's coming into the question and answer forum here.
okay.
I have a comment here. They were surprised by the integrity of workers to notify individuals who may have performed an error. And she said, thank you for sharing that. Another one says, have you worked as a poll worker?
Yes, many times. Many times. It's quite an experience. You know, you have to, the polls open at 6, but the poll workers have to be there at 5. And there are no shifts because you can't even get enough people for 1 shift, let alone 2 shifts. Not to mention, you know, the chain of custody issue that if you had a shift change in the middle of the day. And also there's great fear that people will not show up. And as a matter of fact, in August, in August, the election day started and they were already short 150 people because people who had said they were going to work that day called in and said the week before and said, COVID, I'm not working. And then on election day, already down 150 people, there were more calls coming in. I'm not working. I'm not working. And it's totally understandable, you know, because most poll workers, the average age of poll workers, I think Kathy said this before, is 71 in St. Louis County. And that's an at-risk category. So in August, what they had to do is they had to actually triage their polling places. It was like running an emergency room. They generally, the standard is to have 6 to 8 poll workers at each polling location. So at the places where they were really running out of people, they would say, okay, maybe we can run this one with 7. And they would ask one of those people, could you please get in your car and drive to this other polling place? And there was a bounty. They would give you $40 extra if you would change polling places. So they are staffing up like crazy for November. A lot of people have taken up the charge, you know, because they really want the election to run as smoothly as possible. So I just was talking to Julie Light, one of the deputy directors yesterday, and you know, she said a lot of people in younger age categories are stepping up. So they're having doctors and lawyers and all kinds of younger people who are filling the gaps, and that's a really good thing.
That is a good thing. you were talking about the COVID precautions and everything they did. I have a question that came in. Are the poll workers required to wear their masks all day? There's something about an email was sent to poll workers to only put on their masks if asked by a voter.
So they are required to wear, in St. Louis County, because we have a mask mandate, poll workers are supposed to wear their mask all day. The letter that you're referring to, I believe, is a letter that went out in St. Charles County. This was crazy. This was absolutely crazy. Poll workers in St. Charles County got a letter from the election board that said, you know, we don't have a mask mandate. We can't force anybody to wear a mask. So if here's what you can do. This literally said, here's what you can do. Have a mask close by or have it hanging off your ear. And if a voter comes in and says, you know, you have to be wearing a mask, and this is what they said, act surprised. Say, oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize that. Of course I'll put on a mask. And then they recommended put on the mask. And then after the voter is gone, you can take it off again. Well, that was not well received by poll workers. So I don't know what the resolution to that is, but that was really a very strange way of approaching an election.
I would concur. This one comes in and says it's not a question but they said we received hazard pay for the election in August.
Oh, I think I heard about that. They should. They should. I mean, but people who are poll workers are making, you know, maybe $200 a day for the day. And that is a 14-hour workday and possibly more because you have to stay until the last voter votes. So it can, you know, if you start at 5 a.m. and you go till 7 and then there's still 40 people in line at 7 o'clock, you got to stay. And plus that pay includes, you know, the training session. So it's not a way to get rich. Although I must say over the years, there have been lots of people for whom that $200 means a lot. And there are always workers who are working because they need the money. And I totally sympathize with that because it's a lot of work for not a huge amount of money, but they do it. Years ago, one of the times that I was taking training for a poll worker, they did the whole program. They did all the training and all the talk. And then they said, any questions? And the first hand that went up, the person said, how soon do we get paid? So some people are attached to the mission. A lot of people are attached to the mission, but some people just need the money. And it's pretty grueling if you're there for the money.
You talked about being a volunteer and getting involved and doing various things. What was your first volunteer role and what made you take that first step to become a volunteer the first time?
A poll volunteer, you mean an election volunteer?
Election volunteer. You were talking about stuffing envelopes.
Oh man, I can't even tell.
What was the first one? Why did you do it the first time and how hard was that first one to do?
You know, I can't remember the first time I mean, I'm sure I handed out literature for campaigns when I was in my 20s. I don't know. I'm a news junkie and elections are just, it's an adrenaline rush. I think there's a lot of people who feel that way. It's like the ultimate news event, you know, it's happening. It's immediate. It's different every time. And so I think that appeals to my nature to do that. And also, I mean, I'm a lifelong volunteer. I've done, you know, so many different volunteer jobs in so many different areas. And I just sort of discovered, I mean, I think in 2000, one of the first sort of more immersive ones was in 2004. I worked when Nancy Farmer was running, and that was the year of the Kerry campaign, and I said, I'll just go down there and I'll stuff envelopes or something. And so I think I stuffed envelopes for Nancy Farmer, and I saw how the campaign people were working. And then John Kerry, you know, pulled out of Missouri and everything went to hell. And I don't know, I guess I was hooked. But I must say that now that I'm discovering all these new sort of roles that you can play in elections behind the scenes, it's even more fascinating. You know, I talked about the ballot opener. In August, I took on the job of what they call turn-in deputy. Anybody ever heard of that? It's the turn-in deputies are teams of Democrats and Republicans. And your job is to go to a turn-in location at the time when the polls close with your car, and you stay at this turn-in location, and there are, 8 to 10 polling places in your vicinity, and they are going to turn in their materials to you. The only thing they turn in is there's this orange pouch, the famous orange pouch. And in there is the cell phone, the V drive, which is the digital recording of the votes, and the paper ballots in a duffel bag. And they bring, each polling place brings their ballots electronically and paper to a turn-in location. So you go and you wait for that to come in, and then it's a shift kind of thing. We had 3 people at a turn-in location in Maplewood, and you waited for, the polls close, and then you're waiting and waiting till they get the stuff ready, and they show up. And then when you get, we had 8 there were 24 locations. So we got 8 bags, 1/3 of it. And we left and took them back to headquarters. And then car number 2, which was waiting behind us, waited for the next 8 bags, and they took those back to headquarters. And then car number 3, the people who draw the short straw, because they have to wait till the last ballot is turned in from their location. So they wait until theirs come in, and they take them back. It's a very interesting system. And it's, again, it's a Republican and a Democrat. And, so there's no hanky panky, and you have to sign everything, and you get a badge. You feel very official. You're a deputy. So that was a pretty interesting job. And that's another job I had no idea existed. Now, this next election, I've just negotiated to be in headquarters for the entire day, but I didn't want to just be sort of a parasite and just, observing. I wanted to do something to help. So I said, what kind of job could I have during the day that would allow me to be there, but help out? So I'm going to be a special deputy this time. And the special deputies, you get a supply bag, and you sit at a table. And then if there's a trouble spot, somebody runs out of pens, somebody runs out of ballot paper, who knows what it is, they say, can you go to North County Rec Center and drop off this or do that? So that's going to be interesting. I'm sure it'll be a busy day.
You talked about listening to all the meetings, and we have this new technology with these new voting machines. Was there ever any conversation about online voting capabilities? Do they think that's feasible, something that might be coming in the future?
My impression is in the election community all over the country, there is just not enough confidence in security of online voting. They're just not there yet. I mean, you don't want anything to be connected to the internet. That's one of the best practices in an election administration is to not connect to the internet, not have your voting equipment connect to the internet, not send your results over the internet. Nothing goes over the internet. So when you sign in at your polling location on the little poll pad, the little iPad, that is not an internet device. That is connected via a secure, what's the word I want to say? It's a telephone line that is dedicated, that nobody else can get on, that's dedicated to that. And that poll pad information is only going back and forth on a secure line. But anybody who is sending their results via internet is not complying with good practices at all. We're not there yet.
With all the elections that you've been close to, and there is a lot going on this year, just how do you think the Board of Elections or other people are feeling? Are they nervous? Are they confident? Anxious? Just what's the feeling this year versus other elections?
Well, you can, Eric and Rick always say this, you can never imagine the thing that's going to happen at any election. you think you've covered it, you think you think you've got it figured out, and some crazy thing happens that you cannot anticipate. So, they don't know what they don't know. And that is probably, the biggest thing. I mean, I know they're worried about the volume this year. I know they're worried about staffing. But there is no time to sit back and worry. I mean, I was there on Friday and the place is just buzzing, and I was supposed to be interviewing the person running absentee. And I mean, I've talked to her many times before, and she just came up and she said, I can't talk. There's just no time. So I think they're just very much in the moment and just doing it. And the election authorities, I think, who are going to be the most successful this year are the ones who are the most flexible and adaptable and willing to, shuffle the deck and change for the circumstances as they occur.
Since you're out at the Bureau of Elections a lot, is for anybody who might be considering to going out there and voting in person early, are there times of the day when it's slower than others? Is there any?
I don't know the answer to that. I went there on Monday just to see what's going on, and I drove into the parking lot and I counted 45 people in the absentee drop-off line and about the same amount of people in the voting in person line. But they move very quickly. I mean, they've got a really good system, so that doesn't worry me. I want to say something, if I can, about all the conspiracy theories that are out there. Can I take a minute to talk about that, Mike?
Sure, go right ahead.
Having watched the inner workings of one large jurisdiction, there are so many checks and balances in any election jurisdiction that it would take a lot of people looking the other way for there to be massive fraud. I mean, everybody's watching, and it would be really hard. The other thing that makes massive election fraud very difficult is the decentralization of voting in America. We have in this country about 8,000 jurisdictions, 8,000 voting jurisdictions, ranging from the biggest, which is LA, which has more than 5 million voters, to some little tiny places that have 100 voters. But each of them is administered separately. They go by their state laws, and there's, some uniform standards and things, but every state does it differently. And in Missouri, every county does it differently. So it would be very, very hard to just swing an election either locally or statewide or nationally because of the safeguards and because it's so decentralized. I think people don't really know that. And I'm going to say something bad about President Trump, but we're all Democrats, so I guess it's okay. When he talks about fraud and everything, he is a person who has no idea how voting actually works. Those are the people who are talking about fraud. They don't know the processes as I've described them in the book and as they exist in other jurisdictions. And if you know the processes, you can see how hard it would be. I mean, it is possible to mess things up. Yes, we know Chicago in the 1920s, but there's so many more checks and balances now. There's so much more accountability and accounting itself. You have to match up this and with this, and you have to have a Democrat and a Republican sign everything. I mean, it is really hard. And something that occurred to me while I was doing all this research is, with regard to things going wrong in elections and people saying that it's, bad actors. We all know Murphy's Law, that, whatever can happen will happen. And that applies to elections. And we've all heard of Occam's razor, which states that, the simplest explanation is usually the right one. But there's another thing called Hanlon's razor, which is sort of a joke, but I love what it says. It says, and let me see if I can read it for you. Hanlon's razor is never attribute to malice that which can be attributed to incompetence and stupidity. And I think that's really a good aphorism to remember with regard to elections. And so has anybody on this call been a poll worker? Do you have experiences that, happen to you as poll workers that you'd like to share?
Well, let's see if anybody raises their hands, and we'll find out here. So,
Lori, this is Brian. Brian Leggett with the co-host.
Yeah.
For 10 years, I was one of the first roving techs after the debacle of the first use of the touchscreens that we had after the 2000 election.
Uh-huh.
And they trained a bunch of assistant supervisors as roving techs. And I started that role for about 10 years. And I just got kind of burnt out with the whole very early in the morning, had to take a day off the next day because it was just such a grueling day in most elections. So I could tell you about that. One thing I was going to mention, and so, I have a lot of crazy stories there with those old touchscreens. And I could just vouch for the decision. I watched those Facebook, the choice making on the new machines. And I've used the new machines and, as a user, and I am very impressed with what they did, and can't say enough about Eric Fay. And speaking of Eric Fay, I was on a Zoom call like this a couple of weeks ago with him, and they asked how many poll workers they really need. And he said, Democrats, we are fine because we're so Democratic county, such a Democratic county. And I like to think that the Democrats are more likely to be socially minded and do that kind of work. But that was my own bias. But he did say, please put out the word, and we should all do this because it's bipartisan process, right? Put out the word to all our friends who are Republicans and plead with them to volunteer. Basically, it's a volunteer role, right? It's not, you're not making a lot of money, and that's another reason maybe they're not doing it. It's a long, hard
the $200 is something.
Something. It is something. It was nice. I went out and spent a little bit on special on it after that hard day. But anyway, so I just wanted to say that to everybody, that please put out the word to Republican friends, because the more workers we have, whether they're Republican or Democrat, the better the process is going to work that day for everybody. Because for every process in that polling space spot, and I'm an election protection monitor now, and I do that the whole day. I'm there in these polling places watching things, making sure they're run properly. But we do need more of those out there. So I'll put that pitch out there. If anybody's interested in that, I'm a committee man for Chesterfield, and so they know how to contact me. And I'll put out, get involved with that. So I'll leave it at that.
So you brought up the new equipment, and as I said in my opening remarks, I thought that was going to be the big push for this year. And of course, it was superseded by all these other things. But it was a very interesting process to see them go for the new equipment. It was very, very methodical process. And in fact, for those of you who read the book, it had a plot twist at the end. They went, there's only really 3 companies that dominate the market in voting equipment. And they have about 80% of the market. So, St. Louis County really, really, really needed new equipment. That old DRE stuff was terrible, and they couldn't fix it anymore. It wasn't manufactured anymore. It was running on Windows, Windows 95, I think it was running on, which doesn't even exist anymore. So they did a lot of background research. I read the request for proposal. I saw all the presentations, and they were getting close to making a decision. And one of the companies, Hart Intercivic, was there making a presentation, and they happened to show them these ballot on demand printers. And it was like, where did this come from? We could print ballots on demand. We don't have to have a ballot marking device. You can print a ballot and right there. And they said, yeah, you can do that. And they said, tell us more. That sounds great. And it's all paper. And, tell us more about that. And so they did. And that's what they ended up buying, this ballot on demand system, which you vote on now, which is what makes it possible for you to vote at any polling place in the county, because the database on every in every polling place includes every registered voter in St. Louis County, and you can print out their ballot for where they live, because it's specific, you can print it out right there. That was not what they were looking for when they first started shopping for equipment, but it was a bonus that sort of showed up at the end. That was pretty interesting. And it turned out that the ballot on demand equipment was way less expensive than the other systems out there. The other systems they had thought were going to cost about $10 million, which they sort of did not have. They had about six. And so the ballot on demand equipment, they thought that was going to cost $10 million. The original bids from the companies came in at $13 million. So now they were really in the hole. And then when they discovered this ballot on demand equipment, it was only $6 million. It was like crazy. So why was that not one of the original proposals? Well, Eric will tell you, these ballot on demand systems are not nearly as lucrative and profitable to the companies as the electronic ballot marking devices. So they don't push it. And until they heard about it, they said, that's where we're going. So that was a pretty interesting switcheroo.
Very interesting. Yeah. Thank you, Gloria, for that.
Yeah, Brian, I've got a couple raised hands here. As you pointed out to me, I'm going to let Kathy ask her questions now.
Okay.
Yes,
Kathy, are
I
you
just
there?
had a quick question. I know that you said that 5 days before the election, they can start opening the envelopes and that type of thing.
They can
No?
only start processing the envelope. They can't even open them. They can
Oh,
only
can't open
process
them,
them.
but just process them, like, because Maureen Jordan and we were among the League of Women Voter people who called the people whose ballots were not. So when do they begin the actual sorting of them in order to know which ones need some further curing before they can be, when does that start?
Well, I think they learned from that last election. I mean, it was just totally unexpected that they'd have that volume of incomplete ballot envelopes in the last election. So that was sort of a scramble at the end. Okay, but now I think they've pushed that process upstream, and as they come in, they are sorting them out. And okay, this is interesting. They are working on this. I don't know if this is going to happen. You made those calls. I made those calls. There are a lot of people who made those calls, but it's a pretty inefficient system. They're actually trying. Don't quote me on this, like I'm not promising this, but this is really good inside information. They are working on a robocall system where they can take all the ballots that don't have a signature and put them in a batch in a database and robocall all the people and say, this is the Board of Elections. We got your ballot.
Wow.
You didn't sign it. Here's how to fix it. And then they can have another robocall batch of the ones that needed a notary that weren't notarized. So
Wow.
they're working on that. I don't think it's finalized yet. There's a lot of things that are in flux.
That's
right
great.
now.
And I have one more quick question. While we've been here, I tracked my ballot, or tried to. I mailed it last Friday and it's
Uh-huh.
showing it hasn't been received yet. How long does it take between when that whole when should I get scared? I guess is what I'm asking.
I don't know how long it takes. I don't have information on that. I mean, I don't think anybody really knows quite yet. Because we talked about this a little earlier, it depends, when did it get picked up at the post office, and when did it get processed in downtown, and when did it get sorted, and when did it go to St. Anne post office, and when did St. Anne post office get it over to the Board of Elections, and which bin is it in at the Board of Elections, and
I'll try not to freak out for another week or two.
Correct. I think that's probably good. That's probably a good idea. I want to make one more comment because I want to get this in because it was such a good quote that I heard the other day about hacking and because we're talking a lot about Russians and China and who knows who else hacking, and for the most part voting machines. Who said this? The chairman of the Board of Elections for the state of North Carolina said this last week. I heard him on the radio. He said the machines are not hackable, but he said what is hackable is the mind of the voter. Thought that was a really interesting quote.
Thank you. Let me get over to Maureen now so she can have a chance to ask her question.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes, I can hear you. Now I can't.
Hold on.
Let me try
Let's
it
see.
again.
There we go. Now try it. There was a little delay
Okay.
on my click there. Sorry.
Good. Okay, so you asked if anybody had worked the polls, and I actually worked as a poll watcher who was inside the polls. Now, I did not have a law degree in 2018. I mean, I still don't have one, but I did not hold a law degree. And so I was put into right in the heart of Ladue, was it Bonham Elementary? I think that was where it was. And for the entire day, I was struck that there was no waiting. Maybe at lunch, there was maybe 5 minutes people had to wait, whereby in the city, I knew the disasters that were happening in the city with both down voting machines and the long lines, and I was furious. It was as if the wealthy people, their time was so darn important that they had to have extra machines with no regard to what goes on in the city.
Well,
So
interestingly,
I wonder if you could speak to that.
Sure. So of course, you know already that the city is its own county.
Yes.
And so the city has its own board of elections, which runs separately from St. Louis County. So it's a completely
Yes.
different administration. The city, which is about, let's see, they have about 220,000 voters as opposed to the 735,000 in the county. But the city has old equipment. They are still using the old DREs that the county got rid of last year. And so I am sure that part of their problem is just non-functioning machines.
Okay.
You know,
You're right, it was.
And not enough machines. I'm sure, you know, these machines have gone out of existence. You can't get them anymore, and you can't get parts for them anymore. And their software is, you know, out of date. And so there's probably a lot of it, you know, I'm speculating, but there's probably a lot of equipment in the city that just doesn't work. So they can't even deploy enough machines. Now, in terms of suppressing votes and how they distribute to, you know, which precincts, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. There's an art to getting it right. I know that in St. Louis County, the people who do that they call them the mapping guys. And there's a lot of art and science to getting the polling places distributed properly. And, you know, I have no doubt that there are jurisdictions where they are deliberately making it harder to vote in certain neighborhoods. You know, I'm sure that's true in some places, but in some places it may look that way and it's not because of other mitigating factors.
And your explanation was entirely plausible to me. Thank you.
Okay.
I still got mad though.
Well, of course. But for example, I'll give you an example. In 2018, I think it was 2018, if you're a fan of Rachel Maddow, she spent days talking about, I believe it was Louisville, right? It was Louisville, Kentucky.
Yes.
Where they, you know, they had one voting place for the entire county. And, you know, that was scandalous, but, you know, it may not have been as scandalous as she made it sound, because it wasn't just one little voting place. They used an entire arena, and inside that arena, there were actually 18 polling places. Now, it might have not have been as convenient as it should have been for a lot of people, but they were able to put 18 different polling places in one place, which was, you know, obviously a cost savings. So, you know, I take a lot of the scandal stuff that I see on TV about voting. I take it with a grain of salt, because although I'm realistic, I know there are places that are acting maliciously towards certain categories of voters. But I also having looked behind the scenes and talked to election administrators, there's a lot of hidden factors that we don't hear about that look bad on the outside, but that are not really nefarious. And as Eric said to me one time, there was Rachel Maddow also went off for days about Dodge City, Kansas, how they had taken the one polling place and put it outside the city limits. And, disenfranchised all these people, and the bus line didn't run there, and it was a mile outside of town. And he's, he said, well, it could have been nefarious, but also sometimes he said some of these things that we hear about are just an overworked county clerk trying to consolidate things because their job is so impossible. And the reason I said it's not just because their election job is impossible, but in all of these 8,000 jurisdictions across the country, not all of them have 65 people working. And, Eric Fay and Rick Stream, their entire job is 100% elections. But if you go to some of the counties, Audrain County in Missouri, the county clerk is in charge of elections, but that is not her only job. The county clerk, she may be in charge of elections. She may also be in charge of giving out real estate licenses. She may be in charge of liquor licenses. In one county in Texas, the county clerk is in charge of approving cattle brands. Some of the county clerks around the country give out approved dog licenses. There are just a million jobs that some of these people are doing that make them, distracted from just doing elections. So I'm just saying, don't immediately jump to malicious intent. Although
Thank
there
you.
is some.
Well, that is definitely reassuring because I was well aware of all those stories and it was good to get the background. So thank you very much.
Okay.
We've got two more. Trish will be next, and then Norman, you will be our last question of the evening as we're closing in on 8:30. So
Okay.
Trish, trying to hit unmute and I'm waiting for it there. Okay, Trish.
Yeah, thank you. I just had one other quick comment I wanted to let folks know about. And I didn't know, Gloria, if you had heard this. I've been approached by some folks who are putting together a team of individuals who are wanting to provide wait times at the different county polling locations. And I didn't know if you'd heard about this. There's some folks working behind the scenes. I know they've reached out to the election officials and they're not able to do anything, but I just wanted to lift that up. And if anybody is interested in joining that team, they could email me at votefortrish@gmail.com, and I will just forward your email to those people.
Well,
So
Trish,
I didn't know if
I want to say it's really great that you brought that up because, in fact, another thing that is happening in the background, we're not sure if we're going to have it ready for November, but they're actually at the St. Louis County Election Board are working on an app. It's crazy, right? They're working on an app for the poll pad that would track waiting times at all the polling places. So they would, if they can make this work, they are going to, they think what they would do is take the health monitors who are outside telling people you have to wear a mask and have them periodically count the line and then report that back into a central database. And then also to time the lines as well. And so if that works, you would be able to look it up.
Well, and I'm wondering, one of the challenges with doing this was finding people to volunteer to do it, because really all they need are people, when somebody exits after voting, to say, how long did it take you to vote? From the time you stood in line to leaving, and then to call that in to a central number. And their concern was they couldn't find the bodies to do that.
Right.
But if you're saying that those individuals are already going to be there, I'm wondering if they could tap into that in some way.
I don't know. That, as I said, it's an idea, it's in development. They're not sure they can get it ready in time. But the other thing that's happening that's really cool, I think, is that because we have vote anywhere in this election, when you get your sample ballot, about 2 weeks before the election, you usually get a sample ballot, with your polling place listed on it. Well, they're also going to have in that packet is going to be a list of the 5 polling places that are closest to your own polling place.
Oh, cool.
So, if you drive over to your polling place and the line looks long, and even if this app isn't working, you could drive to the next polling place and you would know where it is.
Okay, good to know.
See,
Thank you.
these are the kinds of innovations that I think St. Louis County is really good at and wants to try. I mean, there are lots of jurisdictions where they do not want to bother with this stuff. You know, as I said, they're too busy, you know, writing death certificates and dog licenses to have time to do this, and they don't have resources for it. You know, when you have a small number of voters and a small staff, you can't do all these things.
Right,
But
but it's refreshing because voting has been that thing, at least in Missouri. We've just been stuck in this, you know, we can't innovate. And just to hear that they're open to that, it's just refreshing. So I'm glad to hear that.
And I just learned yesterday from the board meeting that St. Louis County, this is like so incredible. St. Louis County Board of Elections got a grant from the Center for Technology in Civic Life, CCTL. They got a grant of $2 million to help them with technology. And the grant, that was part of a gift to CCTL from Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook, who gave $250 million to the Center for Technology in Civic Life. Things are happening.
Very cool. Thank you.
All right. And Norman, we're going to let you have the last question of the night. Are you there?
I'm here, and good news for Gloria because I don't have a question. Thank you
Oh,
for the presentation. This was a response to one of the earlier things that came up, and I actually had some questions about the back of the ballot return envelope, and so I called the election board today, and I got right through. I just called the phone number. It's on the bottom of the yellow sheet inside that gives the instructions. But
Lucky
one of the questions was about how long it takes to find out if you screwed up.
and what was the answer? What was the answer?
She told me that it's scanned in immediately.
Yeah.
But you should allow, but between the time that you mail it in and the time that you might get it back, because she said if it's got a problem that they'll mail it back to you. So,
Okay.
but anyway, allow 2 weeks.
Oh, that's good information.
And
Good information. Thank you. So,
now also there was another thing though that I was confused about. You sign your signature at the top of where there's a large rectangle and the yellow highlighter, and that's your signature. And a lot of people, the thing they sign their checks with and their legal documents, you can't tell who it is. It's just their signature.
Yeah.
So I wanted to know, well, on the part below that where it says I and then the blank, a registered voter, etc. What do you want us to do? And she said, well, we want you to print. So, or if you're going to write it, just as long as it's legible, because they want to be sure that you are the one who's sending it in, even though your name is on the front of the return envelope, where the usual return address would go. So they know it's from you, but they want you to fill it out.
Well, this is part of Missouri law. They have to have, they're required by Missouri law to have that stuff on the ballot.
Okay,
and so their hands are tied.
No, that's not a problem. But she said they really should have put on their please print, but they didn't do that.
That would, well, next time.
It has to be legible. Yeah, maybe next time, but it has to be legible. That's the important thing. So they know it's from you, and you've said that it's from you, whether it's by print or by legible signature.
Yeah.
And one more thing, a friend of mine had said, gee, I think you need to when you say why you're requesting a ballot, an absentee ballot or a mail-in ballot, it has to be the same reason that you might have sent in when you asked for it months ago. Remember, we got these.
They're not going to check that. They're not going to check that.
Yeah, right. She says they won't check that, and because we didn't have the option to say that we're in a vulnerable segment of the population. Right. So yeah, it doesn't matter. Just be sure you check one of them.
Right.
And don't worry otherwise. So that's basically it. So everybody have fun.
Great. So before Mike, can I have one more minute?
Absolutely. Go right ahead.
Okay. Before we go, I'd just like to read something to you from the book, if that's okay, a paragraph. Okay. Because it's very meaningful to me. This is on election. My last chapter is called Election Day Live. And as I said before, I spent the whole day at election headquarters, but I decided for that day, I was going to vote live, at my polling place, because I wanted to see how a polling place was operating that day. So that's what I did. I came in there at 5 o'clock in the morning, and I stayed. And then at 11:30, I said, I'm going to go to my polling place. So here's what happened at my polling place. Everything goes according to plan. The poll pad recognizes me and prints my voter ticket. A poll worker inserts my ticket into the ballot printer, and out comes my ballot. The Democrat and the Republican initial the ballot as prescribed and hand it to me. I ask if they have had problems with poll pads today, and they say no. I take my ballot to a table and pause before picking up the black pen provided by the polling place, thinking about germs, and happy that there's hand sanitizer to apply after I vote. I fill in the rectangles. I walk to the scanner and feed my ballot into the slot with the flashing green arrows. After a few seconds, an American flag appears on the screen, signaling that my vote has been recorded. It's easy, deceptively so, because today, as never before, I'm acutely aware of how much effort has gone on behind the scenes to make this simple act of democracy possible. The end.
That's great. And, after your presentation tonight, I can understand that more and appreciate more of the sentiments you just expressed.
Well, we must remain vigilant. We have to live in a really good jurisdiction, but we have to be vigilant because not everybody has got this same privilege. We're sort of in an election bubble.
Yeah. We've actually gone a few minutes over tonight. And I think that has to do with the interest in the topic of tonight. And Gloria, thank you so much. It's been very interesting. We appreciate you taking time out to speak to the people who signed up for this Chesterfield Township Democrat Zoom meeting. As Kathy told you earlier, our next one will be on October 13th. And we hope that you can all join us and that you will tell your friends to come in and hear about the candidates that night. And as always, please stay safe out there and plan your vote. So thank you all and have a good night.
Thank you for having me. Thanks for your great questions. Good night.
Thank you.